Welcome to Windows Server Administration Topic 5. This week's topic is Group Policy, Planning and Management, Backup and Recovery, Troubleshooting, and finally building GPOs. So, Group Policy, Planning and Management. So first of all, before we start planning and managing something, it'd be very helpful if we actually knew what group policy was. So what actually is group policy? So group policy controls the working environment of user and computer accounts and provides centralized management and configuration of operating systems, applications, and user settings inside an Active Directory domain services domain. Wow, that's a bit of a tongue twister. So, group policy, I'll try and put that into my words now. Group policy is a role that we can add to the server that allows us to create domain-wide policies inside our Active Directory domain. So we can create a rule and then we can apply it to a group, okay, using the group policy role. So a set of group policy configurations is called a group policy object, a GPO. Okay, it shares its acronym with the General Post Office. GPOs are containers for one or more settings applied to a specific level in the ADDS hierarchy. GPOs are managed with inside the Microsoft Management Console, the MMC, for group policy, which is called the Group Policy Management Console, the GPMC. And we can actually edit group policy objects with the Group Policy Management Editor, the GPME. There's also a version of group policy called local group policy that allows group policy object management without Active Directory, just on computers. So every Windows computer has some group policy settings. Local group policy will just allow us to locally manage a machine, but inside our domain, we can actually add the group policy role, and then we can create group policy objects. So the group policy management console, when we add the role, looks something like this. So similar to the other roles we've added, Windows Deployment Services, DHCP, DNS, we have this Microsoft Management Console, the MMC. And inside the MMC here, we have things happen over here. At this side, we can right click and make changes to these things here. And those changes are reflected on this side here, similar to all of the other Microsoft Management Consoles. So, okay, so we have here our forest up here at this level. Then we have domains, and then the hierarchy goes down like this. And what we can do is we can right click at different layers in the hierarchy, and we can create a GPO at that layer or at that level. Okay, so when we create a group policy object, this opens up a thing called the Group Policy Management Editor, which looks very similar to the Group Policy Management Console. Here it is here. And this allows us to create different group policy objects. Now, thankfully, we don't have to build these all up from scratch. There are some templates there for us already. Okay, so here's some examples of some things that we can do with group policy. We can control access to the command prompt. So if you've ever been on a network, opened up the command prompt and it said, access to the command prompt has been blocked by your administrator, that's most likely done with group policy. So what the administrator's done is they've created a group policy object and they've said, you know, everyone who's not in the network administrator group should not be allowed to run CMD. Personally, I think it's a bit annoying, but they might not want people in there messing about with the command line. So we can apply security settings. Another classic is you might have plugged a USB stick into a computer at some point and it'll say, you know, plugging in removable drives has been blocked. That can be done with group policy. We can deploy software. We can manage folder redirection. We can configure network settings. We can stop network settings being changed. We can restrict software installation. So it might say, you know, you're not allowed to install this software because that's been blocked by group policy. We can also disable guest accounts, set password lengths, things like that. We can create policies in our domain. So do we just go in and do we just create these, or is there some advice on how to do it? So some best practice from Microsoft would be, don't modify the default domain policy, okay? Don't modify the default domain controller policy. Use a sensible OU structure and apply GPOs at an OU root level. Don't set GPOs at the domain level. Avoid using block inheritance and enforce. We'll talk about them a little bit later. Don't disable GPOs, delete them. So this will prevent GPOs from being accidentally re-enabled later on. This is quite obvious as well. Use descriptive names. Don't call them things like GPO1, GPO2, GPO3. Browser settings is good. Network settings is good. Office policies is good. Implement change management for group policy. So change management is a process by which changes are documented. So for example, a couple of the companies I've worked in, if you wanted to make a change to a system, you'd have to create a change management ticket, and it would have to go to a specific department called change management, who would look at the impact of this change. So implementing change management just means keeping track of changes and documenting them as they happen. Now, it doesn't have to be a huge global team that do this. It could be just documenting things. If it's just you that's working there, you know, just taking control of change management yourself. Finally, use small GPOs. So I have heard a common criticism would be that, for example, someone takes over sysadmin duties in a company, and all of the company's policies have been applied to a single group policy object or two very large, complicated group policy objects. So it's better to have several smaller group policy objects than one master group policy object, which can break or which can cause all sorts of problems for someone to come in and troubleshoot later on down the line. So that's some best practice planning guidelines. One of the topics I mentioned previously was folder redirection. So what actually is folder redirection? Okay, so we can do this through group policy. Folder redirection allows an administrator to forward a user's home directory to a central location. So let's think about a scenario here. You have an office with 100 staff. However, only half of them come in at any one time. So let's say you've set up 60 computers. As each member of staff comes in and logs in, do you want their home directory to be stored locally on that computer? Likely no. So what you can do is you can implement a thing called folder redirection. What we can do is we can redirect their home directory to some kind of central storage server. Okay, so sometimes when you log into an Active Directory computer, you'll see a kind of a, you know, as Windows loads up, we get these messages like applying this policy, applying that policy. One of the policies you might see being applied is applying folder redirection policy. And that will mean that you can go to any computer inside a network and log in, and your home directory will appear to you as if it's on that computer, but actually it won't. Those folders will be redirected to some other storage device somewhere. So this can be done through group policy, and it will mean if employees hot desk, they'll have greatly increased logon times. Now, what's the alternative to folder redirection? The alternative would be for Windows to actually pull a copy of the user's home directory down. So like users/Bob, and all of Bob's documents, pictures, music, all of the data in Bob's home directory would be pulled from wherever it was in the network to the local machine, and that can be quite slow. So if we have folder redirection set up, then what we can do is we can make people log in quicker, because we're not having to pull their full profile down into the local machine. So the administrator can specify where users' files goes, and it means that if, let's say we have a large NAS drive with, okay, for 50 people, let's say we have something like 20, 30 terabytes of storage, and we give each of them 500 gig to start off with. Some of them might never use that, so that's a good thing. And some people might need more. So we could control all of this if we had all this on one server rather than having people roaming around the machines. So that's folder redirection. Backup and recovery, right? The key with backing up group policy objects is we don't do this from Windows backup, okay? GPOs are backed up from inside the group policy management console, okay? So find the GPO in the GPMC, right click menu and click backup when we want to back up a group policy object, okay? So we can also restore group policy objects in the same way. All right, we can restore them from within the group policy management. When we do manage backups, this will open up a window and we can manage backups. So backup and recovery, here's what it looks like. We have backup, manage backups. I've put a little note to myself. So when I was creating this course, I didn't have a domain set up at the time, or when I went through the last revision of this course. So I've put this little note here to myself to remind myself to update this image. So we can do that today. Let me just grab a screenshot of this then. There we go. I'll remind myself to fix that today, because I mean, we can all probably agree that this is a terrible resolution foe. So we'll fix that today. Backup and recovery. How do we back up? But we just remember that the key is that we perform backups through the group policy management header. Okay, group policy troubleshooting. So when we want to troubleshoot a group policy object, how do we actually do that? Right, we can use the GPO tool.exe as a tool we can use to troubleshoot. There are also some classic commands that are good to know. GP update, all right, is the command that we run on a client machine to ask it to pull the latest version of the group policy for that particular machine to itself. So we can do GP update force to force an update, GP update sync, GP update wait. So something that I've noticed in the college is sometimes we go in and the desktop background of all the machines has changed. So let's say the college have a new event on, like an open day, or let's say it's something like some kind of commemorative day that I can't think of just now that would be important, you know, students logging in day or something. They'll change the desktop background, or I know a classic, employability day at Granton. They'll change it and they'll say, have you signed up for employability day? And they'll make that the desktop background so that every time you walk past a computer that's on, you'll see this kind of advert sitting there. That's done through group policy, but sometimes you might notice that some of the machines have still got the old desktop background, and that's because they need to go and run the update force or update sync on the machine. Perhaps that machine was off at the time and somehow didn't pick up the settings. Perhaps someone disconnected the network cable and it hasn't had a chance. In PowerShell, we've got a command as well, get GPO. So we can do get GPO all and then specify the domain in quotes. So in this case, the domain would be ec.com. So how often does group policy actually update? Let's have a look. So group policy has some timers And the if we reboot the computer, group policy will update. So a reboot brings an update. But then the computer will ask for new settings every 90 to 120 minutes. Okay, so at log on and every 90 to 120 minutes thereafter. And I believe, although I haven't investigated this in total detail, that it's done in a sort of slightly random way to prevent all of the computers in the network asking for an update at the same time. So just a little bit of kind of simple load balancing there. Changes to the user configuration will often require a user to log off and log back on again for it to take effect. We can also use GP update force, and the computer will check for and apply new settings without having to wait for 90 minutes if we do the GP update force. Okay, so building GPOs, building them with building blocks. Right, when we build a GPO and we apply a GPO, the GPO has a specific precedence. So the precedence is the order in which the GPO is applied. So the thing that I want you to remember is LSDOU. Okay, LSDOU. And it's actually LSDOU, OU, 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 OU. Okay, so what does LSDOU mean? It means local site domain organizational unit. Okay, local site domain organizational unit. Local site domain OU, OU. Right. Why is there a processing order? And what does this actually mean? LSDOU. It means that if, let's say, I create a group policy object that bans you from opening up the command prompt, and I apply it locally, okay, that will get applied first. But then let's say I create a group policy object that does allow you to open the command prompt, and I apply that at the site level. And then let's say I apply one that blocks the command prompt, and I apply it at the domain level. And then let's say I create one that allows the command prompt, and I apply it at the OU level, the level of the organizational unit that you are in. Right. Which one gets applied? The answer is, okay, the last one in this order. Okay, so if I block, allow, you'll be allowed into the command prompt because the group policy precedence, okay, the last in this order is the one that takes precedence over the other ones. So I can say you're not allowed to do something here, you are allowed to do it here, you're not allowed to do it here, you are allowed to do it here. Here is what will count. Okay, if there's nothing here, then this will count. If there's nothing here, this will count. If there's nothing here, this will count. So this is the order in which group policy gets applied. LSDOU. Now, if there's another OU inside this OU, that will be the last one that's applied. Okay, and that is the order in which group policy is applied. LSDOU. Okay, so starter GPOs. Starter GPOs. What we can do is, let's say we're going to make 10 different group policy objects, and all of them are going to involve a few basic settings to start us off, but then they're going to change slightly. We can create what's called a starter GPO, okay? And that starter GPO is kind of like a basis, a template to get us going, okay? Administrative templates are already built-in policies to group policy management. Okay, so the administrative templates facilitate management of registry-based policy. These are ADM files which describe some kind of registry value that will be changed. So we'll have a look at that in the labs today. We can easily create a starter GPO, and we can look at what administrative templates are available. Now, the kind of administrative templates are like the example I've been using. You know, we want to block the command line for users. There's already an administrative template for that. So we don't have to go and invent that group policy object, okay? We just create a group policy object, grab the details from the administrative template, and put that into the object, and then we apply it somewhere in the domain that we want it to be applied. Okay, so group policy exceptions, right? Now, remember about 3 minutes ago, I said if I apply something locally, then at the site, then at the domain, then at the OU, the last one is the one that will be applied. There is something I can do to this OU down here, or here, or here to say, don't inherit the objects from above the hierarchy. Okay, don't inherit the group policy that's coming down this way. And that setting is called block inheritance. Okay, so we can right click on a container inside the group policy management console and say block inheritance. All right, and that will mean that we won't inherit the group policy from the domain level or from the site level. So let's say an example would be you've blocked access to some network settings. However, there is an organizational unit of technical support people. You might say, well, let's just block inheritance on that to them. So we don't want them to have that. So let's block them from inheriting that security policy. Okay. The opposite, in some sense, of block inheritance is enforce. Okay. So let's say you have a policy here, okay, and you've got block inheritance turned on at the domain level and at the OU level. If you enforce the policy, enforce will just smash through any block inheritance and will enforce it all the way down. So enforce is kind of a sort of opposite of block inheritance. Security filtering lets you use the Windows permissions to apply group policy, and WMI filtering. It's kind of an SQL-like syntax that lets us perform some kind of filtering. So let's have a look at some WMI filtering here. So we can actually go to here for a new WMI filter inside the management console, and it looks like where star from Windows 32 and where version like 10 and product type 1 and not OS architecture 64-bit. So what this will do is this will apply a group policy only to 32-bit versions of Windows 10. Okay, because we're saying not like 64-bit. So there's a WMI filter. Here's a couple of examples of WMI filters. Let's filter out Windows 10 x86 versions. So there's a select star from Windows 32 operating system where version like 10 something and product type 1 and not 64-bit. And here's one where we filter out Windows 8 64-bit systems. So the actual NTFS, the Windows NT version for Windows 8 is actually 6 down here. So where version like 6.2 will pick up Windows 8 systems, okay, and OS like 64-bit. Couple of WMI examples. So that is an overview of group policy. I'm going to stop the recording now for questions, and then we'll have a look at group policy. In the lab today for group policy, we're actually going to go ahead and try and set up some of the things that we've talked about, actually put it into practice, because until we've done these things, it's all very well understanding the theory, but until we've actually tried to put them into practice, that's when we begin to learn. So we're going to create some objects in Active Directory users and computers, and these objects are going to be organizational units, and we're going to create 4 global organizational units: London, Mumbai, New York, Edinburgh. And then we're going to create some sub-OUs inside of our OUs. And then we're going to create a couple of security groups, and we're going to use these to test out the group policy stuff on. And we're also going to create a folder called shares that we're going to use for some file sharing and things like that. I think that takes us over into next week as well for shares, or into the next topic. So let me just go over to the server here. So on Server Manager, if we go to Tools, we can open Group Policy Management. This should open up the Group Policy Management window. Let's just make this a bit bigger. And then let's open out the forest, the domain, and we can actually see some of the policies. So there's the default domain policy there, and this should load up in this window. We've got some domain controllers, and there's the default domain controllers policy. We've got our group policy objects. So if we wanted to create a new group policy object, we could just right click, new, give it a name, and say where the source starter GPO was. We can apply WMI filters in here, new WMI filter. We can create a starter GPO here or a starter GPO folder, and various other tools that will allow us to troubleshoot it. Now, just going to have a look and see if we can rebuild that screenshot with backup. So I think what I want to do is I want to go this button, that button, come out of here, and if I do this, this will give me, okay, that looks good. Move that back. Okay, and if we head back over to this guy, let's do, oh, isn't that a much better screenshot than I had before? Let's just do, go away, delete, delete. Okay, let's just put that there. I mean, look at these side by side. This is hideous. Let's delete. Let's just move that to the center there. There we go. All right, backup. It shows you how to back up a. So if we just remember, the key is, if we want to back up a group policy object, we do it from inside of our group policy management console. Now, the tasks in the lab, we jump over to the lab, are, to start off, we need to create some organizational units. So to do that, we would just go to Active Directory Users and Computers. When that opens, we would right click on the domain and we would click New, and we would choose Organizational Unit. And we would give it a name, for example, Edinburgh. Okay, and there's the Edinburgh Organizational Unit there. We can then apply various policies and things to that later on. Now, let me just jump back to the next task. Creating a sub-OU inside an OU. We should be able to do that from Active Directory Users and Computers by going New and then Organizational Unit. Okay, and we'll call it Edinburgh sub OU. Okay, this is just an example for demonstration purposes. You can see there's a sub organizational unit inside an organizational unit. Okay, now create a shares folder. Okay, so in Windows Explorer on the server, we're going to go to this PC and create a folder called shares. So let's go to our C drive on our server and just here create a folder called shares. Okay, there. We can then do things with this folder later on. We're going to use this over the next couple of weeks. Okay, so then to create a group policy object, we're going to go into group policy management, expand out the forest and the domain, open the default domain policy, have a look at that. Then we're going to open starter GPOs and we're going to create a demo first starter GPO. So to do that in group policy management, we would go to starter GPOs, okay, and create a starter GPO here. So new, okay, demo first starter GPO is how we would do that. Okay, put various comments in there. Don't think that's really important. Okay, so there's our demo for starter GPO. Now what we're going to do is we're going to link a GPO. Okay, we're going to create a, I believe we're going to create a demo first GPO somewhere and link it to the demo first starter GPO. Then we're going to link the demo first GPO to the Mumbai OU that we created in step 1. Then a little bit about group policy inheritance, And then what we're going to do is we're going to create an OU, and we're going to apply block inheritance to it. And then we're going to create an OU, and we're going to apply the WMI filtering to it by following these steps. Okay. Finally, the last bit, we're going to open up the administrative templates. So go to Group Policy Management, select Group Policy Objects, and edit. And then we're going to use our administrative templates to prevent access to the command prompt. And then we're going to go as Bob and open up the command prompt. So at the moment, if we're on the domain as Bob, okay, if we do this, let's just try and do CMD. Okay, at the moment, Bob can open this, all right? And can he do ipconfig? Yes, he can. So we want to use group policy, okay, to prevent Bob from doing that. And we can do that using the GPO search tool to find an administrative template called prevent access to the command prompt. All right, and then if we start the client, log in as Bob, we might have to reboot, remember, to get this to take place, or run the GP update /sync. Now, if we attempt to run CMD, it will come up and it will say, you know, you're not allowed to do this. And those are the tasks for Lab 5. Okay, so once you've got everything set up, you've got your Active Directory domain, it should be fairly straightforward. It's just applying a few settings in Active Directory users and computers, and then applying a few settings inside Group Policy Management. And that is Lab 5. So I'm going to stop the recording now and see if there's any questions.